Hey up Blogosphere, I've run out of breadcrumbs, which in this house means it's time to break out the variac. That's right, it's time for Panko Part 2. Like before, I've got some basic 75% hydration bread dough made with 2% salt by wet of the flour and no oil. For the full backstory, you'll want to watch Part 1 up here, but I will be doing some slightly different experiments with the cooking this time, and also trying out some different methods for turning it into crumbs. So let's build ourselves an electric resistance oven and get cooking. For the first run, I'm going to use exactly the same setup as last time. These are the same stainless steel electrodes, no thermal insulation behind them, and the same separators that I used last time as well. I'm loading it with slightly less dough per each run, just so that I can do more runs out of the same batch of dough. Like last time, I'm going to cover this and leave it to rise for half an hour at room temperature. Right, it's risen enough to get decent contact with both electrodes. This batch is a little bit small for this box, but this is what I've loaded it with, so let's go for it. I'm going to give it a couple of amps, I guess. Okay, now we wait. So like before, we're 5 minutes in. The amount of voltage required to get 2 amps through it has decreased because the bread's expanded, and also so its area is increased, but it's also pressing itself into the electrodes, and we're starting to get a bit of steam. It's making a few interesting noises. Okay, we're only 10 minutes in, and conductivity's dropped off significantly to the point where even 120 or so volts was bugger all current. Looking in there, the bread shrunk away from the electrode, which is basically what it did last time when it was finished cooking, but I've done it in only 10 minutes this time, which may be a bit fast. But I'll check out the bread and see if it's still good, because if it is good at 10 minutes cooking, then that's a much faster way to do it. It means you can crank the power. Well, I think it's as done as it ever was. Yeah, plausible. For the next run, I'm going to use exactly the same setup. I'm just going to run at half the current. The idea being to find out how sensitive it is to the total power density, or the average power density in the bread, I guess. That previous one was higher than I'd done before. I think when I'd been doing 2 amps on the previous one with a larger bread. So I'm going to run this one at 1 amp and see if the results are similar or different. As before, I'll leave that to rise until it's doubled in size. Since this run's targeting 1 amp, which is almost off the bottom of the scale of the variac, I brought in the clamp meter. So about 55 volts to start with, and I will chase it around to try and maintain 1 amp. About 5 or 6 minutes in now. The current isn't really going up at any appreciable rate, so I'm just going to leave it. We're on about 35-ish volts. So we've reached the point at which the current's dropped off significantly, even at 150 something volts. So I'm going to call it as done. It's taken about 4 times longer, as you'd expect for a quarter of the power. So the question is, will it still have cooked the bread? Because it's not going to have achieved such a high peak internal temperature. Let's find out. Well, the top is certainly a lot less well cooked. It hasn't risen, as well, but I think that may have been my not proving it for quite long enough. The dough had cooled down, but yeah, the top has really not cooked well compared to this one, which basically is cooked right the way to the top. So I think this is too low a power density. For the next run, I'm going to try and insulate the top surface using this. It's a follower. This one is in fact just made out of foam core wrapped in cling film. But the idea being that this will insulate the top of the dough, stop it losing heat upwards, to see if it makes the domed top cook a bit more evenly. And this run's going back to 2 amps because it just gets it done quicker. Well, we're only 6 minutes in and it's already dropped off current wise. This is at 105-ish volts. So either it's already cooked or something's gone a bit different this time. I guess we'll find out in a few minutes. Alright, we're down to 110 milliamps at 150 volts. I'm calling it for done. Oh, and this guy's going off. It does seem to have worked. This insulator on the top I think is a good idea. It's not made an enormous difference, but yeah, I think the top on that one's cooked better than the other. So yeah, I think that's the way to go. Next thing to try will be to insulate behind the electrodes. Okay, so here we have our 3 samples that have cooled down and then dried overnight. So we've got 2 amps, 1 amp, and then 2 amps with a hat on top. Let's cut them in half. I mean, initial observations is that the 1 amp one has this completely uncooked dough on the top. So I think we can rule out lower power densities. But let's chop them in half and see if there's anything interesting on the inside. Well, they smell about the same. Yep, bread. Also bread, but no, basically the same. Yeah, bread. So all of these power densities worked. The 1 amp took ages and didn't get hot at the top enough to cook the dough that's exposed to the outside world. The hat, it's compressed the top a bit, but I think it basically is a good thing. This cooked faster. I think basically this is pointing towards the fact that it's not super critical how much power density you achieve, but you can increase it to get a faster cook time. Insulation is good, and I don't think it's really worth chasing a constant current. I think you can set a fixed voltage based on the electrode separation, because the resistance of the dough point to point is going to be fairly constant. So I think if you just pick a voltage, I mean these 2 amp nominal ones, they were done at about 80 volts. A volt or 2 per millimetre, I think, is the thing to aim for. So if you have only a fixed voltage supply, just increase the separation distance on your electrodes and make a loaf that's that size. Obviously there are restrictions on surface area and heat loss, but I think what I'm going to do next as a sort of a final configuration for the oven is insulate behind the electrodes and place it on some insulation while it's cooking, and I'm going to use the follower because then that will keep the heat in the top. I think that's going to give the best bake, the best edges, because if you consider the outsides, you know, there's always a bit of weirdness on the outside where it's been cold because it's been against the electrode. So I think thermal insulation, probably fixed voltage. I will keep playing with that, and you know, between 1 and 2 volts per millimetre of electrode separation, I think. So here's the revised oven setup. I'm going to place it on a piece of foam core for insulation on the bottom. And for the electrodes, I've spaced the electrode off of the wood. I've left the slot open on the bottom because that's where it rests on the ground. But the other 3 sides I've blanked off with a bit of foam core so that the air stays trapped in here, and that hopefully provides a little bit of pocket of warmth. Obviously this could be better, but this is what I've got. This could be thinner, which would allow it to heat up quicker and also wouldn't conduct the heat away to the edges so fast. But yeah, this was just a quick tweak I could do without having to go and, you know, find another piece of stainless. So yeah, hopefully this will provide a little more insulation and allow the edges to heat up faster. Ideally, I would insulate the faces of the spacer blocks as well, but I don't really have any practical way of attaching anything together and covering it in something food grade at the moment. So I'll just use these as is for now. But yeah, ultimately I'll probably replace these with something that I can face with something insulating, and then probably try and attach a piece of silpat to it as a sort of food surface. Okay, so let's run another batch. I'm going to do a bigger batch this time, seeing as I'm no longer needing individual experimental runs. Like before, I'm going to let that prove. It seems to expand by, you know, about 30 to 50% from when you start baking. So, you know, as long as it's got a bit of headroom in the top before you hit the button, I think it's okay. It's not going to spill over. And I'm going to use the follower as a cover while it rises. This one's proved and ready to go. I'm going to put the follower just in contact with the top of the dough. Which is there. Now this should expand up quite a bit while it's baking. This time, rather than trying to chase an exact current, I'm just going to dial it to 90 volts or so and let it go. Starting off at just under 3 amps, it'll go up and then it'll go down. Getting some pretty hectic steam out the top. It's pushed the follower almost all the way out, but it hasn't come out. So this quantity, which was 350 grams of dough, seems to be about right for this volume of oven. And we've topped out at 5 amps, and it's now gently starting to fall back. I imagine it'll fall back quite quickly. It's dropped back to about 1/5 of the peak current now, which the experience has shown it'll generally sit at for quite a while. I'm going to let it run for a little bit because that'll hopefully give it the best chance of the heat getting into the edges where it's previously been a bit wet. The current's now fallen back to about 1/20th of the peak value, so I will call it at that and take it out of the machine. Yep, this is excellent. The top's got a good bake on it. The sides haven't suffered too much from not being insulated. It is all baked about as well as I could hope. So yeah, I think that's the trick, is insulate all the sides, give it a good chunk of voltage so it gets hot fast, and then just leave it to it until it's fallen off to a 20th-ish of the current, at which point the power's fallen off exponentially. And for good measure, let's just have one more run in its entirety in real time. And here we've our samples of electric bread. I've dried these to the point where they make good crumbs with the cheese grater, which I've found to be somewhere between 5 and 10% moisture by weight. Now, the cheese grater does do a fine job of turning them into crumbs, but it's a bit labour intensive. Let's see if we can find a better way. Let's try some power. Yeah, they're a bit fine. Plus, it's going to take me a while to load 400 grams of bread into this. Let's see if we can find something bigger. How about a stick blender? It kind of works. Yeah, some of these are alright crumbs. I think if you stuck at it, it might work. But my house is now entirely breadcrumbs. I think I got some in my ear. What about a forceps a bit? Pretty good, but it's a bit hard to control and kind of wasteful. How about the lathe? Something's not right here. Ah, of course. You've got to use a live centre for breadcrumbs. Yeah, well, the swarf looks okay, but there's a lot of setup time here. There's got to be a better way. I think you all knew this was coming. Well, yeah, kinda. They're good crumbs, but most of them are elsewhere in the garden. Well, unless I can find some fancy way of catching all the shavings as they come off the angle grinder, I think the old-fashioned cheese grater's won this one. If you're going to try this and you own a food processor, I'd recommend trying it with bread basically straight from cooking. Let it cool down, but don't let it dry out. I found that the harder dried bread got stuck between the blade and the body of the food processor, locked it solid, didn't make crumbs at all. But that's all I've got for you for now. If you've got any other bright ideas on turning this into crumbs, leave a comment in that place I left that thing that time. But other than that, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.